Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Camille Moore with Connect, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in to 7 Trends Shaping Experiential Events with Lindsay Martin-Bilbrey, CMP. Before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping notes on the platform. You can type in your questions for Lindsay in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or via the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, which I see some of you guys already using, so that's great. We'd like this to be an interactive session, so please send in questions throughout the webinar. A recorded version of this session will be available on demand on our websites, where you can find additional on-demand webinars for any of you needing last-minute credit hours before CMP testing. Yes, you are able to watch our sessions on demand and still receive credits. For everyone joining us live today, the credit was approved by the EIC for 1 credit hour towards CMP IS Domain G, Meeting and Event Design. For any of you future viewers watching this session on demand and not live, please email me directly at cmoore@connectmeetings.com to receive your certificate. I'll share more information about our upcoming webinars at the end of the program, but let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank Possible for sponsoring today's session. And before I introduce Lindsay, you will notice a map on your screen about our upcoming events for 2019. If you have any questions about attending or wanting to know more information, please contact my coworker, Kristen Francis, Senior Director of Sales at kfrancis@connectmeetings.com. One moment while I type in her email address for everyone who would like to contact her. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Lindsay Martin-Bilbrey, CMP. A lover of automation, ice sculptures, and pie, Lindsay joined Possible Events Apps in 2016, aiming to bridge the gap between events and technology for associations, corporations, and nonprofits. She started her career as an events manager and marketing consultant at an independent events company, Nifty Method, nearly 20 years ago. Along the way, she got her CMP, worked with companies like Ford Motor Company, Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, SiriusXM, and the Nonprofit Technology Network, and realized she could never go to a concert again without asking herself, how is that rigging attached to the floating stage? Lindsay, welcome. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Camille. I'm so excited to be here today, and I always have to kind of apologize to the audience at home. Like many of us event profs, I am on the road. I have just been able to do some speaking and sponsoring at Go West Canada, which is an event up here in wintry Edmonton, Canada. So I'm in their delightful international airport. So if you hear an announcement in the background, know that I am here drinking the airport coffee for you, and that the Canadian version of the TSA wants you to make sure we're all safe. But let's get into it. It's actually a really wonderful time at the beginning of the year to talk a lot about the trends guiding what's happening with the event space. And there's a lot of buzz going around on how we can make it new and personalized and fantastic for our attendees. Because many of us, we didn't get into planning events and conferences and trade shows because we just liked ordering the most amazing menu ever, right? We got into it because we love coming up with ideas and realities for our attendees and changing it from something that they're just at into an experience that they can take home and share with the new friends they met on site and the colleagues and community they have back at their house. So for us today, we're going to look at the guiding trends about experiential events, but we wanted to just stop for a minute and think a little bit about what that means for you as an event planner. So here's my information. Sorry, I'm getting used to this. So if you have questions at any time, please interrupt by putting a question in the chat box. I know that Camille's going to be doing some Q&A there. Pathable is an event app company, and so if you have questions, you can tweet at us at pathable.com and kind of go in. So what's the difference between an event and experience? You know, there's a lot of folks out there who are like, well, of course I do experiences. We have experiential stuff all the time at our event. And, you know, for me, a lot of times it comes up into do you really? Do you have something that is challenging the status quo, or are you doing the same thing at your sales meetings, your annual conference, and the trade shows that you've done for the last 2 to 5 years? So an event is a noun. It's a thing that happens. The picture that you're looking at there is no doubt very familiar to you. It's a general session, right? And there's been lots of changes to our general sessions recently. We have these beautiful video walls that stretch all the way around the breakout or the general session room. We have things that come down from the ceiling. But if you look at the seating arrangement, people are sitting there lined up in rows with very little elbow room, 6 to 10 feet in the aisles that comes across, and they are watching. They are not participating. It is a thing that is happening to them. There is a keynote speaker, there is a band, there is something on the stage that is coming to them, but they are not necessarily getting out and becoming of it. You might get fancy and walk on the side and have a catch box that comes into the audience, but it's still, they're an audience. They are not participants. They're still attendees. Whereas an experience is a verb. It's an encounter or something that they participate in. The Hot Wheels booth that you see here is one that was done at a recent trade show in which the organizers brought the attendees in and put them in to touch, to feel, to think, to participate inside something. They picked it up. They came up with different ideas. We typically think of something like that from an interactive nature, to experience, to encounter, to touch, to feel, and almost a breakout perspective. But I often wonder, as we think about the trends that are shaping what meetings can look like in the next year, 5 years, to me, we should always be able to touch, not just be an attendee, but be a participant. So thinking about that, how we're going to position experiential events as we're talking about them here is not just a thing that happens to us as attendees, but rather something where we're encouraging our attendees to become those participants who can essentially use the 5 senses and be part of your show, create ideas, and help in some ways drive the way the event breaks out. So that leads us to our first question. How would you categorize your portfolio? And that word is very a deliberate choice, because a portfolio is a thing of all of the experiences that you design. Do you design and execute just events where they are lots of attendees? Or when you take a look at it, do you have lots of experiences built in where your attendees become participants? So I want to kind of go to the chat box for a second and see if anybody wants to raise their hand and just maybe say, here's kind of an example of what we're doing. So we'll give us just a minute or so. Anybody on the line think about their portfolio as we do events, or do we do experiences? Or maybe we do something that's kind of right there in the middle, and we're in the motions of transforming what we're thinking about. No? No one? All right, well, that's something where you guys can continue thinking about and see what might go in. So let's go ahead and without further ado, drop into our first trend. So this is one that we always hear about, right? It's all about the immersive attendee experience. And I want you to look at the differences between the top photo and the bottom photo. The top photo is a general session taken at a recent, actually, event planners conference. They build it as the revolution, but everyone was still sitting in the seated rows and coming forward. And below was one taken at a participant event that was I think that's a medical convention last fall that we worked with. And the attendees are actually inside the bubble. Now, I know what you're thinking. If you were trying to think about what it would be like to, produce a general session with bubbles floating all around and people throwing at them, probably it'd be a little distracting. But just thinking about the differences of people sitting versus people coming in, we want to immerse them into that experience. So our first trend is thinking about how do we take people into our overall day-to-day experience of what we've traditionally seen as an event and give it to them where it is immersive. This is an example that Bell Helicopter did at the recent CES in 2019. This is their second year in a row where they've tried to establish an immersive attendee experience using a combination of virtual reality, augmented reality, actual builds that they did on their corner trade show booth, and just coming up with different ways that people would interact, like a red carpet experience. They ran something like 170,000 people through this experience. They built 4 sections coming in. The first section was an introduction. A lot of the folks who come to CES come to look at all the amazing tech, right? They want to go, what is the next big thing for what we're going to do? So from an introduction perspective, the guide basically came in and said, okay, why are you here? What are your goals? What are you hoping to accomplish? And as event planners, I think that that's something that's very normal to us, right? As we're coming in through our marketing materials, as we're coming in through our communications with members or employees, we're going, we're hoping to accomplish this with our next event or experience. Why are you coming? What can we do to narrow that gap so that we can come together and really create something that meets your objectives and goals and realities? So they came in and they first set expectations about what it is and got a sense of what the attendee wanted to do. So right away, the attendee isn't just sitting there and absorbing. They've become a participant because we know their goals and objectives. Next, they said, great, we want you to see the future of air travel. Instead of picking up the Uber from the airport to get from point A to point B, we want you to see what it would look like as if you could take an air taxi. And that's interesting, right? I mean, who would have thought that instead of having to take the Uber, and in Texas, where I'm from, and they're piloting some of these programs, no pun intended, to get from Frisco, Texas, which is the top of Dallas, down to Fort Worth, which is where I live, can be a painful hour-and-a-half experience on 30 miles of road. But if I take an advantage of the air taxi, already I'm like, oh, that'd be great, but I have lots of fear, I have lots of trepidation, and I worry it's going to be expensive. But my goal as a participant in this experience is not to just come in and just be afraid of it. No, I want to learn, how much does it cost? Is it something that's practical for me? What does that look like? Also, why does that helicopter have rotors that are shaped like giant wheels? So they took them in, established the goals, and then they ran them through an experience. They sat them down in the cockpit of this 10-seater helicopter, and they had them put AR headsets on. And they basically took them through the entire journey of feeling what it would be like to board the aircraft, go up in the aircraft, fly in a very quick jaunt across the city center that is the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and then land to be on their own. It took about 5 to 7 minutes to do it, which is what they're hoping to accomplish from this. So in 1 to 2, very easy exercises, Bell Helicopter has not just told these attendees what's going to happen. They've allowed them to take part. And then once they deplaned, or I guess it's not deplaned, what would it be from a helicopter, y'all? Once they get off the helicopter, they then took them into an informational session that helped them kind of unpack and understand and get more information, right? So it was a highly educational experience using several different mediums that allowed the participants to taste, to feel, to smell, to understand, and then brought them all the way through. Now, we're seeing growing instances of this on main stages where they're bringing people in through AR and virtual reality. And that comes with its own challenges from an experiential perspective, because it can be expensive for some groups. But it's not as expensive as you would think it is. And it's something that I highly encourage anybody who's looking to transform an event to an experiential to take advantage of that trend and to start some kind of conversations internally at your organization or company about what would that look like if we brought them in and allowed them to be a part of it? What would we better understand about what we're doing? How could we change or enhance our training, our development, our different ways of the ways that we do what we do by having the person be a part of it rather than watch a part of it? The next trend that you want to talk a lot about is thinking about using the venues that you have. So let's say you've got AR and VR. It's maybe not part of your budget yet, but everybody has a venue in which they participate in, even if you're doing a hybrid event. So getting your venues involved is absolutely vital to the experiences. It's not just enough to have a ballroom anymore. It's not just enough to be positioned in the convention center's main airplane hangar, right? And it's something where I think as event planners, we don't always challenge the venues enough to help be part of the experience. They are renting us the space. And we understand that. It's a transactional relationship. But the venue is a canvas where you can take it and transform it into your ideas. But it's not always your canvas, if this makes sense. So stay with me here. The sales directors, the people who work at the properties where we produce events, they know their property better than anyone else out there. They spend day in and day out running people through, understanding what air wall is going to be effective to block out noise and what air wall isn't, to understand where it's going to be able to be best to hang something from the ceiling to come in, where it's going to have the best back-of-house entrance to where the banquet staff can come in and make the best or quietest interest possible. So why wouldn't we engage those partners at the venues and bring them in and say, you know, we want to do something this year that is going to be truly transformational and experiential, and we want you to be a part of it because your property is fantastic and you can get credit for that too. And so as part of your negotiation, as part of your ongoing talks when you go on your site visits, ask the tough questions if you've sketched out in your brain of what the experiential event you want to accomplish. What would it look like if we brought ice in? What would it look like if we decided to have water? What would it look like if we had animals? What would it look like if we had this or we had that? You know, I think convention centers can sometimes be more prepared for it, but it comes at a price, and it shouldn't always necessarily, because if we never urge the venues that we work with to push further, the trend of us continuing to produce and execute the same events will always be a challenge. I mean, I think we see that with the Wi-Fi transformation. Many properties are just now catching up from something that has been as necessary to our participants to actually be part of our experience of only to download the handouts for the last 10 years. And so it's been a slow revolution. Knowing that that revolution takes time, now is the time to start those conversations with your venues, because it is absolutely going to be something as a trend that they have to be a partner in what we want to do to create a great event. So the next thing that we urge you to do is to take the details of what seemingly feels ordinary and commonplace and just a part of what's coming in, and it extends not just the venue, but the places where your participants eat and sleep. You know, we often think about room drops as we're coming in and like those little gifts that we can make them feel taken care of. But what would it look like if you transformed the very elevators that they rode up and down in? This is a great example done by the Conran Design Group, which is an agency in London. They took over one of the local hotels and they transformed each one of the experiences or each one of the elevators into an experiential model, so that when the attendees were leaving the event and coming back to decompress before the next happy hour, they were wanting to keep those conversations going. You know, events are all about building long-term relationships, and they're all about thinking about what that looks like in little ways where we can spark conversation. There's a great book by the Heath brothers that's talking about making it sticky. What is it from an experience that stays with you, that makes you go back and go, oh, that's right, that was that place where that thing happened, and not only did I meet X, but I learned Y, and I cannot wait to go back and do Z. This experience with the elevators, an example of how you can do that. Maybe you don't necessarily need to transform as elevator B is as something where you can see a never-ending, fun room mirror. But something as simple as putting up as a sticky wall, like we do inside the convention centers to tell people where to go or to thank our sponsors, the question of, are you a dog person or are you a cat person? Immediately, you have an opportunity for someone to think about it, right? It starts a conversation, it breaks the ice, and it allows your event attendees to, again, become participants, to learn more about the person they're in the elevator with, to get a sense of what makes them a person, and being personable together builds those relationships that we want them to do. The other one over there on elevator C gives them a place to kick back and relax, right? But your event naturally has its own personality, has its things that it's wanting to accomplish. And this is a really great low-hanging fruit from when you're trying to convince your board, your CEO, your conference planning committee to try the experiences. Say, whoa, we may not necessarily be ready to bring the ball pit and all of this wonderful air and vendor things into our actual general session, but we'll get there. Let's try small. Let's take over the elevators or the stairs and see what that looks like. I saw an example of a staircase with the clings coming up on the stairs, and it had who was better, David Bowie or Elton John. Any type of thing that you can find that it doesn't have a lot of stakes. So you're not exactly going to start a conversation about religion or politics, but something that there's a commonality that all of us as humans can connect on and no doubt have opinions on. really gives us a great way to spark that experience trigger and get people talking about what's cool. So we've explored a little bit about what it would look like from the very large with the AR, the VR. We've talked a little bit about bringing the venue in and making them a partner, because that's really a trend where it's not something we can do alone. It takes a trigger. This trend here of working with the small details, the things that matter, the things that connect us as humans, leads us into what happens when your audience does it on its own. So who's familiar with Dilly Dilly? Anyone? So if I just yelled dilly dilly out into the ether, would anyone know what I'm talking about? Oh, look, we at least have one. Camille gave me the pity yes. Go Eagles, and Stephanie is right there with it. So Dilly Dilly is an advertising campaign that Weeden and Kennedy ran for Anheuser-Busch. And funny enough, so Dilly Dilly, it came in, it was actually a series of stunts. Experiential marketing is what they called it, where they had somebody out into the audience dressed up like a knight. What they were trying to do was build the community around beer, which isn't maybe the most lofty goal, but they were trying to take the tribalism and community that already exists inside sports participators, seen as Stephanie just showed us there with the Go Eagles, and talk a little bit about what it's like when you don't need to spend money in order to make it happen. Now, as an event prof, that's kind of a revolutionary idea, right? Like, what do you mean I don't need to spend money on this experience to go in and to create? No doubt I have to buy the food, I have to buy the signage, I have to make sure I've got volunteers there to make sure it gets happening. You know, for us, a lot of times, you know, the friends of the family, the influencers, whatever it is you call your super conference goers, those people are some of your greatest resources. And for one of the experiential trends in 2019 that I urge you to take advantage of is find out what they're talking about in order to leverage some of the enthusiasm and excitement and things that you've not thought about from an innovative outsider perspective about your event, and tap that and let them go. They took this basic concept of tribalism that existed inside football goers, festival attendees, and they turned it into a catchphrase. Dilly Dilly can now be heard in stadiums around the world. I was at IEG last year in Chicago, and the advertising account manager from Anheuser-Busch was there. He goes, you know, I think on the entire campaign, he's like, we spent money on signs to initially get the word out at one football game. He goes, it's brought us more than $5 million worth of publicity and so much more of that in profits and revenue, just for the simple fact that we created a catchphrase because we saw an opportunity for people to band together and to coalesce around it and see if they could out-compete each other. And I think if you think about the way that your conference clicks, so to speak, kind of come in, people do find their tribes sometimes. They do come in and they have these different things coming in. And there are leaders inside of those different tribes and segments inside your conference community. If you can tap into that from an experiential standpoint, they no longer become those people that are sometimes frustrating to work with because they are so opinionated, because all they want to do is help make our events better. But rather you're able to leverage the strengths that they bring to your event in ways that can come and create a sense of community and continue to transform your attendees into participants. They do it inside the general sessions so that even if everyone's sitting in rows and just watching a session, they come in and they bring energy to the room. They get people talking. They continue to build those emotional callbacks and those long-term relationships as you are trending towards what it could look like to totally transform your event to an experience. So the next trend that I want to talk about is my favorite ultimate icebreaker. And everybody has a love-hate relationship with icebreakers. It's funny, Passable was actually developed as an event app 12 years ago because the two main engineers, the CEO, Jordan, and Peter, the CTO, were Microsoft developers, and they're painfully shy. They hate going to places. They dislike talking to people. Not that they don't like people, it's just because they never can think of things to say. Jordan used to say he used to love it because once he would get in there, as soon as they had an open bar, not because he's a big drinker, but because he knew that at least a conversation could be struck up there. He goes, I knew that I had things in common with all of these people, but it was so tough to take myself as the person that I normally am and become that extrovert that needs to be in there. And especially if it was a new place that I was coming where lots of people knew each other, right? The ice was tough to break through, and my way that I connect with people was not it. So that they designed Pathable so that it literally shortens the path between two people, and it gave them, through the discussion boards and through the other different ways of just using technology to help people find each other before they got on site, whether it's taking your 15-page know before you go and turning it into posts and different things on your social, or whether it's when you're there playing games so that you can get people involved. And this ultimate icebreaker that you're looking at from JetBlue was exactly that. It's an example of gamification. They took over a little segment of, I think it's in Brooklyn or downtown New York City, and they built a little hut made completely out of ice. And inside the ice, they froze different ordinary objects. And you could potentially win a trip to Palm Beach. But in order to find the magic golden ticket that took you to Palm Beach, you had to work with people to get in and do it. You couldn't just go in and as one person break it down. No, you had to think about the different ways that you could band together and break through the ice, because the ice was really that thick. You'll notice down on your lower left or lower right-hand photo, I'm not sure it's left on yours, I'm sorry, my screen's backwards. You know, they had it where they're having to come together and chip through. There wasn't any implements provided at that point in time to get people where they could come in. So like people were flagging strangers down because it was -20 there in New York, and they wanted to get that flight where it was so warm and so sunny for the all expense paid in vacation in Palm Beach. And this is just what I think would be such a unique thing. I mean, we have ice sculptures. We have, you know, different instances like this. And kind of thinking back to PCMA in Chicago 2 or 3 years ago, this would be something cool where instead of just having it sit outside of the hotel, maybe you have it sitting outside or sitting inside in a place inside your convention center. Again, making that venue a partner and doing it. So thinking outside of the box from things that we already bring into our events. And once again, transforming attendees into participants, because you've given them a common goal to work together. And some of the best memories that these people could make, it's like, who is going to be the ultimate winner? With normal gamification, especially in a digital mobile app, you know, or working it where you do a scavenger hunt inside your exhibitor, there's not as many stakes. And I say that as someone who works with an event app company and tells you, yes, gamification is a good idea. But why is gamification a good idea? What is your goal? Just like in the very beginning when Bell Helicopter was asking the attendees who wanted to go through their virtual flight experience, what is it we want them to accomplish? What is it that you as the attendee or participant wants to accomplish? I want to come to this event and I want to meet colleagues where I can form relationships so I have a community of practice that helps me get better at my job. I want to build business networking relationships so I can take at least 5 decent leads back to my office. We all come with different hopes and dreams and goals for these events that we produce and put on. As an event producer, sometimes we get so focused on thinking about, okay, do I have my BEOs together? Do I have all of the volunteers trained in order to make sure that when they come and they talk to my front desk, I'm going to do it? Do I have my crisis communications and risk management plan so if heaven forbid something happens at our event, we can help keep everybody safe? Do I have all of the Wi-Fi straightened so that everyone can have at least 5 devices set up? I mean, there's a lot going on. It's not just one thing we do. And even when we have a team, we feel so accountable for it because of the types of people we are, which makes us excellent event planners. But sometimes we forget about the softer skills of why we're running the event. I don't run events because I like to just order menus, although I do really enjoy that part. I run events because I like to connect people. I want people to build these relationships so that not only am I going to get to see them year after year and understand and get excited about how their lives are changing, I also want them to build those relationships too. I want to hear about how that person that they met at that networking event 5 years ago was now somebody who was at their brother's wedding, and can't we see what it's going to look like from this group photo? Isn't it something so that you can stay connected with these people on a personal basis? And all the other byproducts of doing something like this ultimate icebreaker lends itself to ways that helps us build that long-term engagement, as well as customer loyalty, member loyalty. They're going to remember those experiences and continue to come in. So what would be some other examples of doing the ultimate icebreaker? You could do something where, maybe it's a warm destination and so you don't want to do ice. You could do something where it's like, think carnival. You have it where they have to get in and they have to work together to get into the pool to fish something out. You could do it if you have an event around Halloween, something haunted house-like as one of your events. How are you banding together to get people to experience the thing? The escape rooms, take a look, do some research on what escape rooms look like and the different exercises and scenes that they're pulling themselves through. Those are such a wonderful example of ultimate icebreakers, right? They're encouraging team building. They're thinking about different ways that you can come together and create a new reality for yourselves. They're going, just like from our previous slide, thinking about a way that it's creating and tapping into that tribalism. You're building out those experiences, and then you're helping create the small detail-oriented ways, as well as taking advantage of your venue and really figuring out what all of that looks together to create networking, education, and reality. So let's go in and talk a little bit about what that looks like from an overall transformation. These trends are not necessarily things that are happening right now, and definitely overall, but one of the best conferences that comes in is Dreamforce. Dreamforce is the annual user conference that Salesforce puts on. Now, granted, Salesforce has a budget that far outstrips most of us, but George P. Johnson Events has really done some fascinating things there. The whole purpose of George P. Johnson is to create experiences. So what they did for Dreamforce this year, they had a new product where they were transitioning all of their Salesforce users from an old legacy system of what their CRM and marketing tools used to look like. And they were bringing everyone into what they called the Lightning experience. But as part of the Lightning experience, that's really tough for someone to relate to, right? I mean, if I said, hey, Stephanie, we're going to bring you in and it's going to be the Lightning experience and it's going to change the way that you do business. It's going to change the way that you plan events. And yeah, and you're like, oh yeah, Lightning experience. That sounds interesting. I really don't know what that means, right? So in order to help people understand what it could look like, they turned the Moscone Center into a national park. What you're looking at here is a giant build out that they had that was between this Moscone north and south. And inside, they built this campground. Instead of having beanbags on the floor, they built the kind of seating that you see outside of yurts, and they had log cabins and logs come in. They encouraged all of the exhibitors to think about the traditional booth experience they did for their very, very large exhibit hall, and they told them that as part of this year's experience, they turned those exhibitors and sponsors into partners and said, we always like your booth, but what would it look like if you did something like this? And we'll help you make it happen. They encouraged their general session speakers to get into the camping theme. And so each one was kind of bringing a flavor to it. And what I really like about this is that Dreamforce was thoughtful in their approach as they were coming up with a strategy for transforming their event into an experience. And as a trend, this is one that I hope is going to be the best in 2019. Because again, as event planners, or from the events that we run year after year, we don't necessarily make all of the people who help us put the show on a true partner. Going back to this one, going back to what it would look like to not just your venue, think about the average number of vendors, exhibitors, sponsors, volunteers, staff, press, and attendees you have that attend your conference, or your sales meeting, or the board meeting that you run. It really does take a village. And so themes might feel a little bit 1980s, but there's a reason they're so popular for proms and for the things that we used to do. And I'm not saying you have to be full-on campy, and it's going to make some people uncomfortable, but it gives everybody something to go around. And if executed well, or in a way where at least you have metrics to understand maybe if you didn't necessarily reach the bar you were hoping for, and you have a clearly defined goal, it really allows you to bring those experiential pieces so that every piece of messaging, every piece of from registration to marketing to when you get on board and they welcome you to the hotel, an attendee feels like they have entered the Redwood Forest and they are not just going to learn the lightning experience, right? They're going to come in and they're going to see what it really looks like to be part of the show. Another conference that does this to a certain degree pretty well is Inbound. You know, they are all, it's a marketing group again, but they want to think about the different ways that you can be part of their main stage. They use different styles of seating to get people to close and up and down. Go West Canada, the event that I was just at this week, is another really great one that uses that for some of the events. You know, they come in and they use different elements of it, primarily in their happy hours, where they invite all the vendors in and they encourage them to do things that would never, ever Oh, look at that, Kristen Butler. Yeah, no, it was fantastic. Good job, you. Where they don't necessarily give them any limits. Like, how scary is that as an event planner to come in and say, okay, we want you to do this theme. We have these great ideas. Here's what we as the organization are going to be doing. Here's some of the things we'd like you to participate in. Now, the sky's the limit. Here's the things the venue says we can't do for insurance purposes, but if you really feel passionate about it, man, we'll talk to the fire marshal for you. And go. I mean, I just got a little bit nervous there saying that out loud. I'm a control freak. I'm an event planner. I want to make sure that you're not going to set the building on fire because I have to pay for it. And like, they're not actually going to set the building on fire, right? But it's the different ways that people will surprise you. You know, we put, I think unintentionally sometimes, so many limits on the ways that you can create at events. We do it to our speakers when we say that you have to submit an abstract for a proposal to be so many words long with so many bullet points with such a different way. It has to be shown just in this way in the printed program guide. We do it again when we come back to our staff and we say, you only need to wear this uniform and use these specific words. We do it in our social media when we say, okay, we're only going to use it for marketing and to showcase the logos of our advertisers, but don't allow the fun things that make our events like a community to go in. That's one of the trends that I want to see coming into 19 and that really would transform into experiential is to think about what are the limits we're placing on it and how are we going to take what is just a basic idea into this whole immersive world where we can come in. You wouldn't have to use virtual and augmented reality, although if you wanted to, it would be great because you have all these other different elements of what is already your show and you are just there providing that space for it to exist in. And I think that's a pretty powerful thing, especially as you start the conversation internally to think about it. You know, you've got lots of low-hanging fruit. Let's say you're coming in and you're wanting to start with something like this. It's explaining why you want to start with something small with the details and the elevators. And they're not maybe ready for something like this, although if you said, no, but seriously, it's just an ice sculpture. But if you say, you know, somebody else is going to help leverage the cost, for us as an organization, that trends that we need to do is just help create a partnership that we already have with partners and let them think that the sky is the limit. It would be amazing, I think, to see what you could have moving forward. So let's recap before we get into the back part of it. So we're going to come in and we're going to think about the immersive attendee experience. What does it look like to have a true staged revolution? Trends are just trends, right? Different people, different events, different organizers, we're all doing elements of this. And this is where your community can be a very powerful tool. One of the most favorite things that I got to watch at Go West Canada this week was the discussion boards inside the event apps. You know, they had lots of different stages of planners. And when I say stages, I mean they had some independent planners who were just starting out. One of the women who was helping volunteering at the registration booth, she had just quit her job and was going out on her own. She was starting small, doing festivals, and I think she's doing a gala next weekend, and she was terrified. She was like, I have the basic idea of what it's supposed to look like, but I just don't know, you know, where I want to go, but I have lots of options. And then we had all the way up to some of the grocery store chains and, you know, Bell Telecom, who plan these huge, amazing experiential activations. And they were all together inside one group, inside the app, inside the dinner tables, inside the happy hours, sitting in the general session together. And they were talking about what it would look like if we did this. Why don't we do that? How could we do this? And that, to me, is the true evolution in helping us transform from just events to experiences. If we remember that we have this incredible community of practice that can take it and think about, you know, what I do day to day isn't always the best fit. And what that girl over there is doing may not be the right fit, but together we can talk about what it really looks like from an immersive attendee experience. And if I have that safe board to bounce ideas off of, I can come back and that person won't look at me like I've lost my mind when I say, you know, I think this year we're going to have someone rappel down the wall, pick people up, and then bring them back up with them. You say this to other people who don't work in events and hospitality, and they kind of raise their eyebrows and go, yeah, I mean, that sounds like something you could do, but wouldn't it be great if it's something you actually did? And having someone and say, and you know what would be really great if you did that? You could come in and have checkpoints along the way that could help them with the education, and you turn it into like scaling K9. And as they're doing that, they're learning that as we work together as teams and we think about it, each section and milestone they get up, that's the way they're coming. And then by the end of it, you just make sure you scan their badge in for CEU credit. Now, granted, that's a little extreme, but for the certain type of association, or let's say you work with the young entrepreneurs organizations, that type of thing becomes really thrilling. And you bet that those people would continue talking about that experience. Talk about an interactive breakout, right? Something that doesn't have them in a traditional classroom environment. You're not just flipping the learning. You're not just allowing them to teach. You are bringing them into it. You are still educating and allowing them to get their professional development credit and education, but you're pulling them into a space that allows you to do something magical. And also, think about fun. You know, it's tough to think about the happy hours that we do. And a lot of times, you know, how many of us have sat through the black tie galas at the awards dinner? And they go through, and then we thank the 1,400 sponsors. We have the people come up from an awards session. We want to acknowledge every single past president. Let's say it's a sales or corporate meeting. We want to figure out ways to make sure that each sales leader is properly recognized without hurting the feelings of the same important, powerful people who did not necessarily make their sales goals this year. Like, how do we do that and break it up? One of the coolest things I have seen in a while to turn them into experiences is there was a guy named, I think it's Terrell Owens. Terrell turned housekeeping announcements into a sing-along. Came in with a whole bunch of groups, and so words to songs that almost everybody knows. And as he was doing that, he was also dropping in information about where the bathrooms are. Don't forget what the Wi-Fi code is. We're like to thank this person and that person. And then as it is, just kind of like the seventh inning stretch at a baseball game there in America, he's bringing it along and those people are feeling coming in. The housekeeping's boring. It's not something any of us like to do, but it's necessary, right? And it's not something where it's patronizing. You do have to know where the bathroom is and what the Wi-Fi code is. And sometimes people don't read the signs or the slides. So figure out new and exciting and immersive ways to do it. Anything to get them not just sitting in their seats and watching, thinking about that and being fun about it. There are things inside the world of events, especially experiential events, that we don't have to do for any reason except for the fact that it's fun. And man, that's freeing. That is one of my favorite things about it, because sometimes one goes, why'd you do that? Because a little bit of space and time and playing with bubbles makes me feel happy. And I think that's about as an immersive experience. If I remember when I'm happy and the person that I met next to it, I've made a relationship for life. The next one is making sure that you're thinking about things that you maybe didn't think about. Maybe you don't think you could afford experiential events because it feels expensive, because people like Bell Helicopter or companies like Bell Helicopter are building out these gigantic installations at trade shows, bringing on things that sound frighteningly out of our reach, like virtual reality, augmented reality. But you know, in a lot of ways, we drop hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of dollars on our food and beverage. We come up with some crazy different pay scales for the ways that we do at the venues. Take a look at all the different elements of your program, of your event. and think about what is really necessary and what is nice to have. And if we really turned that bad boy on its head and tried to make it an experience where we immersed our attendees into becoming participants, do we need that particular venue? Do we need that particular meal? And what are we accomplishing with it? What are our participants' hopes and dreams, and what are they trying to do? Maybe augmented and virtual reality is there. Maybe you need to call some of the people that are doing it and at least start a conversation, because these are assets that can live with you for years. When American Airlines tried virtual reality to redo some of their training programs with the way that they did their lounge, they didn't just do it once. I mean, they didn't just do it where they have to record it year after year. Apologies. They come in and they built this experience out one time in 2012, and they are continuing to use it even now into 2019. So it's like rather an investment that you would make in a trade show backdrop with the way that your main stage is coming in. You've built this interactive experience that helps your attendees be part of it, and then you enhance it and you make tweaks along the way. It's a long-term asset, something that probably your accounting department would like too, because A, they get to capitalize it, but B, it's not going to be this huge chunk of money that's coming in, or to get your sponsors excited about it. This was an example of Go West 2019. I took this picture at the Fairmont McDonald, which is a delightful old hotel that was built in the 1900s here in Edmonton. You can see the ice sculptures. It's this beautiful room that they use for weddings. No less than 5 venues were involved in Go West this year. They had just over 500 attendees. They had the Fairmont McDonald, they had the Edmonton Convention Center, they had the Westin. MPI Foundation was working with one of the local restaurants here in town, the Craftworks Brewery, and then the Ruth Chris Steakhouse, which is right in between the Fairmont and the Westin, were partners. One of the organizers from TimeWise who helped produce this event last night was talking about the fact that it was probably an $8 million show, and all told, hard cash spent, they spent $150,000 Canada. Now let that sink in. They had almost 150 exhibitors, 5 venues, 530 or some odd attendees. A lot of money was spent. Like this was just an example, very small, of what they did. I mean, they had huge installations where they came in and light shows, ways that they immersed, this incredible, fantastic video wall. I mean, all of these different things. 25 speakers who were coming in, all professional, that were being paid, who were donating their time. Partnering with your venue and thinking about the ways that they can challenge and be challenged and become partners with you can be really powerful. Now, granted, TimeWise had a very large leverage there. They were bringing event planners in from the same region who would probably rent from it. But Air Canada was there. Lots of different groups were there. BizBash was there. And it's not a huge amount of people. The payoff, the long-term payoff, was much stronger. And the same thing goes for some of these venues. I think we often forget as event professionals how small our world can really be. I came to this event, it's my first time in Edmonton, Canada, and I saw probably 30 people I knew just because of the trade shows and other meeting planning events that we go around. And it's a reminder that over the years, you build these long-term relationships to help make your events better, and those people do too, and that we all can work together to do it. So pull your partners in for venues. Use the small details. Think about the different ways that you can transform what might seem ordinary into extraordinary. Find the ways to get people talking. Are you a dog or a cat person? Do you like peanut butter and jelly? What about peanut butter and bananas? Maybe you have something where that's what you turn your dessert bar in and the game comes and extends. But it's not, again, something you're doing for educational credit. It's not even something that's going to be outrageously expensive. It's something that's just there, and it's continuing to take your attendees and make them a participant in this event you're producing. Use not just your vendors as partners, but your people, your attendees. Just like Anheuser-Busch thought about Dilly Dilly and what's the ways that they could take tribalism, think about the trend of empowering your community. Just like we give our vendors and our exhibitors and ourselves permission to think outside of the box and not put limits and controls on it, what are different ideas that, man, we sit in those conference planning committee meetings and we go, yeah, I'm never going to do that. You have shut it down even before then. Take a game, and if your next event's coming up and you need to put ideas together, take your sticky notes out and play the yes and game. No idea is too outrageous. And then if their ideas are not outrageous enough, you come up with something outrageous and you write it on there and say, yes, and what else could we do? And I bet you'll be surprised by what's coming into it. And sometimes, yes, they are not affordable, but there are options, right? And it may not be this year that it happens, but you have taken that next step into transforming what was an event inside your portfolio into an experience for your attendees. Think about the ways that your attendees are connecting. Again, we are in the business of creating face-to-face relationships. We are in the business of helping those long-term relationships flourish, whether they are face-to-face or they're connecting via video conference, if they're connecting via Facebook or connecting via WhatsApp. You know, some of my longest-term friends I've known for 30 years. And my favorite thing about them is that I see them twice a year. And it's not that we don't love each other. It's not that we're not valuable for one another. It's just that life is busy. And it happens to us as business professionals too. So what are those ultimate icebreakers that you can bring in, whether it's actually where you are breaking the physical ice, or it's something where just the experience of doing something together, create truffles, do a cooking class, think about ways that you're helping them scale that mountain from an education standpoint and really physically getting something out of it to earn that CEU credit. Those are the trends that from a long-term networking perspective are going to help you create also that most amazing experiential event. And then think about the immersive ways, whether you want to come in really small or really big. Think about theming your events. Don't worry about it being, you know, Moonlight Love with all of the crazy buzz. It's like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the original one with Luke Perry, just because that was the best. Am I dating myself here? Maybe. But, you know, thinking about it, they had that theme when they were thinking of the prom planning, Earth, we love you, don't tread on me. It's so silly, it could be fun. And it doesn't have to be so serious. So many times we have the types of personalities there from a trend perspective that we stop ourselves from being fun with our events. We stop ourselves from thinking about what could be. And that's my favorite experiential trend coming into 2019, is that it's all about disruption. Not necessarily innovation, which has almost lost its flavor, right? What does innovation mean? It's a no-nonsense word just because everybody wants to innovate. We're always iterating what we do year after year. But we need to disrupt in small and big ways and think about ways that we're not just having people sit in the front row and watch, sit in the breakout room and watch. If I could, I would ban theater site seating just to get a half moon table in there or some way where I could put my people face to face and have them talking. And those experiences that you're going to build are definitely the way that you should be looking forward to doing it. So this is something that as we're coming in, it's the reality of many of our people today. They are always on their devices. They are always on their phones. They are always somewhere else. They're sitting inside your general sessions, in your sales meetings, in your breakouts, and they are there because we are making them be there for some reason or other, whether their boss wants them to be there or because it's just what they do every year. Experiences allow us to shake them out of it. It is not just something that they're in. It is something that they are participating in. And yeah, you are going to have people who are not going to love it first out. And you are always going to have people who are going to give you feedback. But you know what? That's what helps create even better experiences when we're coming in. So we want to find different ways where you can take it and make all of these people look up at you and look next to the person next to them and think about the different ways that you could create an environment. So that's it, guys. Those are the 7 trends that we see for what could be creating greater experiences for your attendees and to participants into 2019. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, there are a few questions that we have that came through the Q&A box, Lindsay. One question from Suzanne wants to know, a lot of the events we host are budget sensitive. Do you have any suggestions to make an event an experience at low cost?
Absolutely. So I don't have it on here. So one of my favorite events that I ever did was the Nonprofit Technology Network. Now, I mean, in its very name is the nonprofit network, right? So what we did is we had a photo booth that was staged around the convention center and the hotel, different pop-ups and things coming in. There was no backdrop. There were just different checkpoints, if you will. We went out and we spent, I think, maybe $20 at the local dollar store. We bought a plastic fishing pole. We bought funny hats. We bought noses. We bought paper plates and cups and confetti and things that, you know, we'd cleared it with the venue saying we were going to do this. But essentially, we just created different ways to liven up our hallway conversations. And then inside the breakout rooms, we put penguins in, which is like it's an insider thing that they do at N10, but, you know, it was just different ways to help disrupt them outside of it. So thinking back to that ultimate icebreaker conversation, we basically challenged them to see who could come up with the best photo, and we offered free registration for the next year. So they had incentive to participate, right, because they wanted to come. Many of them struggled to make the registration option. We spent $20 total on the whole stunt, and then we let social media and the event app be the place where they posted things. So like I said, it doesn't have to be huge Dreamforce money, although it would be great, right? So that's one instance. The other one is to get your sponsors involved. You know, go to them and say, we've got this great idea, premium sponsor, and we want to figure out ways we can do it. How could we partner together so that you underwrite this experience and we create something that allows us to do it? And you don't have to necessarily be big and bad in the way that you talk about recognizing that that sponsor did it, but just like they sponsor the luncheons, you know, this is something that allows the sponsors to have ownership of it. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. Does that help?
Great, thank you. We have time for about one or two more questions if anyone has any other questions for Lindsay. I got a few questions, Lindsay, wanting to know if they could get a list of the 7 trends that you mentioned through the broadcast.
Absolutely. We'll be sending out, we can send out the deck, and then we also have like the explicit ways that some of these did it because we reached out to some of the groups. So we're more than happy to provide those.
Great. I can connect with you on that. Do we have any more questions at all? One person did want to know, when you were talking about the icebreakers, they want to know, are you saying icebreakers are a trend or that gamification is the trend?
I think it's both, if that makes sense. Gamification is one of those things that everyone's like, but what? But I think that it's more icebreakers themselves are the actual trends, because gamification is something that is just part of our events now. I think it's really thinking deliberately and naming what we do to help create relationships that icebreakers are the trends.
Okay. We have 2 more questions. Jasmine wants to know, do you have any tips for university events?
Oh my God, yes. So we were actually working with MIT on an event. So they have something where they come in with their student on board, and they have different ways where they get their student leaders, because many universities do, when they bring in new students, whether it's grad school, whether it's undergrad, they think about different ways that they can help kind of find those commonalities, right? Because you've got a bunch of students, whether they're kids or adults, who are trying to like be immersed in this event. And so a lot of the same ways that Dilly Dilly did it, they try to create different things. And so gamification is a way that you could come in. So think about the ultimate icebreakers. What is it that makes your university really special? And then create a list of like 4 to 6 checkpoint exercises you can do. And then thinking about how you want to onboard them in. Maybe you have a welcome weekend where you have an in-residency and you have them bond together in doing it. What are the icebreaker events that don't feel silly that you can come in? You can apply the theme trend to it. You're coming in, and so let's see, I went to Oklahoma State University. We had Camp Cowboy. So all Camp Cowboy was teaching me to be the best cowboy that I could be. And I, grew up with the Cowboys. I've been a fan of it my entire life. But I learned the school song. I learned the chant. They do it at TCU, where it's the riff, ram, boom, rah, whatever it is. If you're a TCU frog, I'm sorry, I just butchered it. But MIT, they did it by leaning into some of the more nerdy elements of themselves, their words, not ours. But it was fun facts and different ways that the university had basically helped the change of the world. And so they were saying, this could be you. So they were taking this inspirational model of how it's coming in, and they were tapping into the students' drive and expectations by taking different goals in their admissions essays. And they were saying, okay, if you want to do this, find your people from an icebreaker perspective. You know, this alumni did this. It ties into this element of this this element of our school, and how are we going to do that together? And then they use little exercises to make them part of it.
All right, if we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, we will respond via email, but I want to thank Lindsay again for sharing with us today. After this webinar concludes, you will be directed to a short survey. If you could fill it out, that would be great for us to get some feedback. You can learn about Connect's past and upcoming webinars on all of our websites listed on your screen right now. And I didn't mention earlier, but there is a handout of this presentation that you can download. If you look at the black widget on your screen right now, the one with the paper fold has a handout for you to automatically download. Again, for everyone joining us live today, the credit was approved by the EIC for 1 credit hour towards CMPIS Domain G, Meeting and Event Design. We'll email your certificate tomorrow evening. Again, if you're watching on demand, please email me directly for your certificate. It will not come to you automatically. If you have any further questions, please email me at cmore@connectmeetings.com, which I am typing right now. We hope you'll join us again on February 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for an informative session on Wi-Fi prices with Connect speaker Will Karam. Thank you for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great day.